Certainly. Here's an informative tutorial on connecting AWS Lambda to API Gateway for REST APIs. Connecting AWS Lambda to API Gateway for REST APIs. Introduction. AWS Lambda is a serverless computing service that allows you to run code in response to various events without provisioning or managing servers. AWS API Gateway is a fully managed service that enables you to create, publish, maintain, monitor, and secure APIs at any scale. By connecting AWS Lambda to API Gateway, you can build serverless RESTful APIs that automatically scale and handle a wide range of workloads. Steps to connect AWS Lambda to API Gateway. 1. Create an AWS Lambda function. Log in to the AWS Management Console. Open the AWS Management Console and navigate to the AWS Lambda service. Create a new Lambda function. Click on the Create Function button. You'll need to choose between authoring from scratch using a blueprint or deploying a function from a container image. Configure function settings. Provide a name for your function. Select the runtime, e.g. Python, Node.js, and set the execution role that grants the function permissions to access other AWS services. Write your Lambda function code. You can either inline edit or upload your code. Ensure that your function code handles the input and output formats required by API Gateway. Create an API in API Gateway. Navigate to API Gateway. In the AWS Management Console, go to the API Gateway service. Create a new API. Click on Create API and choose REST API from the options available. Define API settings. Provide a name and description for your API. You can choose between creating a new API or importing an existing one. 3. Create a resource and method. Add a resource. Once your API is created, add a new resource, e.g. /myResource. Resources represent endpoints in your API. Add a method. Select the resource and add a new method, e.g. getPost. This is where you'll configure how API Gateway interacts with your Lambda function. 4. Integrate API Gateway with Lambda. Select Lambda function integration. In the method setup, choose Lambda function as the integration type. Specify Lambda function. Enter the name of your Lambda function and ensure the correct region is selected. API Gateway will automatically configure permissions to allow it to invoke your Lambda function. Test the integration. Use the test feature in API Gateway to verify that your Lambda function responds correctly. 5. Deploy the API. Create a deployment stage. In API Gateway, create a new deployment stage, e.g. dev, prod. Stages represent different environments for your API. Deploy your API. Deploy the API to the selected stage. This will generate an endpoint URL that you can use to access your API. 6. Test and monitor. Test the API endpoint. Use tools like Postman or curl to send requests to the API endpoint and ensure that it correctly triggers your Lambda function and returns the expected responses. Monitor and debug. Use AWS CloudWatch to monitor logs and metrics related to both your API Gateway and Lambda function. This helps in debugging and performance tuning. Conclusion. Connecting AWS Lambda to API Gateway allows you to build scalable and serverless RESTful APIs. By following these steps, you can create a Lambda function, configure an API in API Gateway, integrate the two, and deploy the API to make it accessible over the internet. This serverless architecture is highly efficient and eliminates the need for managing